The Big Bang Theory's biggest Penny and Leonard mistake happened long before their divisive pregnancy twist. When it comes to sitcom relationships, few have sparked as much debate as Penny and Leonard on The Big Bang Theory. Over 12 seasons, audiences invested deeply in the story of the socially awkward physicist and the aspiring actress next door, rooting for their love story even as it frequently stumbled over miscommunication, poor timing, and laugh track-infused misunderstandings. Yet, while the divisive pregnancy storyline in the later seasons sparked heated online debates, the show arguably made its biggest Penny and Leonard mistake much earlier, and it fundamentally shaped how viewers perceived their relationship for the entirety of the series. To understand this, we need to rewind to Season 3, a period often regarded by fans as the show hitting its stride. By this time, Leonard and Penny's relationship was solidifying, moving beyond awkward flirtation into the territory of actual partnership. Yet amid the romance, the writers made a critical choice in how they framed Penny as a character, and by extension, Leonard as her counterpart. Instead of fully embracing the equality of their dynamic, the show leaned into a pattern of character undermining that would haunt the series for years. Penny, as she was written in those seasons, became a vessel for humor that often came at her own expense. Leonard, by contrast, was consistently portrayed as the rational, albeit socially challenged, anchor. It was funny in short bursts, Penny tripping over physics concepts, Leonard overcompensating with his intellect, but the cumulative effect was a subtle but damaging one. It suggested, consciously or not, that Penny's success as a character was contingent upon her failures or ignorance. She was charming, yes, but consistently positioned as the less smart partner, and Leonard's patience and intelligence were constantly validated by her missteps. This framing created a relational imbalance that would make later storylines, like the controversial pregnancy arc, feel inevitable yet unsatisfying. By establishing early on that Penny was often the one catching up to Leonard's intellect, the show tethered audience empathy to a very narrow vision of compatibility. The writers were telling viewers, in essence, Penny is lovable, but she needs Leonard to function in this world. And while some might argue this is classic sitcom shorthand, in practice it limited the emotional depth of the relationship. Leonard and Penny were repeatedly prevented from truly growing together as equals, a problem the writers never fully addressed until much later, and even then, only inconsistently. The fallout from this early mistake is more apparent when we examine pivotal moments in Seasons 3 and 4. Consider the episode The Creepy Candy Coating Corollary, where Leonard concocts an elaborate plan to win Penny's heart after a brief breakup. The humor derives largely from the awkwardness of Leonard's social maneuvering, yet Penny's response is treated as almost childlike confusion. She's bewildered, flustered, and ultimately acted upon, rather than acting herself. The dynamic is subtle but telling. Leonard is the strategist, Penny the reactive participant. The series continually reinforces the idea that Leonard drives the relationship, even when the plot ostensibly centers on Penny's choices. Another critical example appears in the Adhesive Duct Deficiency Season 3, Episode 8, where Penny faces a personal crisis. She has to deal with a minor accident on her own. While this could have been a moment of autonomy and character growth, the narrative instead focuses on the men's reactions, Sheldon's neurotic assistance, and Leonard's protective instincts. Penny is positioned as the passive recipient of care, reinforcing the narrative pattern that she exists in Leonard's orbit. Humor masks the imbalance, but for attentive viewers, the implications linger. When relationships are framed this way consistently, it conditions the audience to view Penny's agency as secondary, undermining the potential richness of her arc. This early relational misstep has profound implications when the pregnancy storyline finally arrives in the final season. Fans reacted in two polarized ways. Some celebrated the milestone as a natural progression, while others decried it as yet another plot device that treated Penny as a vessel for traditional domestic fulfillment. Those critical of the arc were, consciously or not, responding to over a decade of storytelling that subtly reinforced gendered hierarchies within the couple. Because the show had established Penny as the reactive partner and Leonard as the intellectual guide, the pregnancy felt less like a mutual decision between equals and more like a scripted endpoint aligned with outdated sitcom tropes. The misalignment between audience expectation and narrative delivery explains why this plot point was so divisive. It's worth noting that The Big Bang Theory often thrived on its character contrasts. The humor of pairing an outgoing, socially savvy Penny with a neurotic, intellectually focused Leonard is undeniably part of the show's charm. But there's a fine line between contrast and imbalance. Early seasons leaned too heavily into a dynamic that celebrated Leonard's intelligence while treating Penny's contributions as ancillary. The writers had a wealth of opportunity to subvert this trope, to show Penny as not just witty and resourceful, but as someone whose skills and insights were equal to Leonard's scientific prowess. Instead, the show favored laughs over layered characterization, and the cumulative effect of that choice shaped audience perceptions for years. What's particularly striking is how the series occasionally hinted at an alternative approach, one that was never fully realized. Episodes like The Love Car Displacement, Season 4, Episode 13, and The Dumpling Paradox, Season 1, Episode 7, offered glimpses of Penny asserting herself, making independent decisions, and challenging Leonard on equal footing. These moments are memorable precisely because they contrast sharply with the show's default pattern of relational imbalance. Fans often point to these instances as evidence that Penny had the potential to be portrayed as Leonard's true intellectual and emotional equal, but the show rarely sustained this approach consistently. Another dimension of the early misstep is its ripple effect on audience investment. Viewers are naturally more inclined to root for couples when both partners demonstrate growth and agency. By undercutting Penny's autonomy, the show inadvertently weakened the long-term payoff of Leonard and Penny's union. When the pregnancy storyline arrived, some audience members found themselves disconnected, not because they opposed the idea of a family, but because the show had not consistently demonstrated that Penny and Leonard were evolving as true partners. The arc felt like the culmination of structural imbalance rather than authentic narrative development. Moreover, the misstep reverberated beyond the main couple, influencing the treatment of secondary characters. For instance, Amy and Sheldon's relationship in later seasons benefited from a more balanced portrayal. Both partners are idiosyncratic, socially awkward, and intellectually brilliant in complementary ways. The contrast is stark. Amy and Sheldon are depicted as negotiating their eccentricities on equal terms, learning from each other and growing together. By comparison, Leonard and Penny's dynamic often feels top-heavy. Leonard is the anchor, Penny the foil, a choice that diminishes the emotional resonance of their ultimate milestones. Reflecting on all this, it becomes clear that the biggest Penny and Leonard mistake wasn't a single episode, line, or plot twist. It was a foundational decision in the early seasons, to frame the relationship in a way that subtly reinforced a hierarchy between intellect and charm, reason and instinct, man and woman. This choice shaped audience perception, influenced subsequent storytelling, and set the stage for later controversies, including the divisive pregnancy arc. In a show celebrated for its witty writing and unique characters, this structural miscalculation stands out as a moment where sitcom convention overshadowed character,